Welcome. In this video, we'll be covering verse 29 of Daniel chapter 11, and we're in the thick of the 6th Syrian war. So if you haven't watched the previous video, please do so. In the previous video, we finished on verse 28, in which Antiochus is unable to take Alexandria, so he returns home, leaving troops in Pelusium, so he's ready for his second attack. Okay, so what happens next in our story? Well, in verse 29, we read the following. At the appointed time, he, Antiochus, shall return and come into the south, but this time it shall not be as it was before. End quote. So Antiochus is going to attack Egypt again. So let's discuss the events that lead up to this second invasion of Egypt. Before we do this, however, I just want to remind you of the agreement between Ptolemy VI and Antiochus IV, which we read about in verse 27. It reads, "The two kings, their minds bent on evil, shall sit at one table and exchange lies, but it shall not succeed, for there remains an end at the time appointed." End quote. So remember, in this agreement, both men are lying. Antiochus tells Ptolemy something along the lines of, "Let's go conquer Alexandria so I can restore you as king of Egypt." And of course, this is a lie. Antiochus has no intention of ever restoring Ptolemy as the king of Egypt. He wants to be the king of Egypt. And in response to this lie, Ptolemy VI says something along the lines of, "I trust you, Antiochus, and have no intention on going back to my brother and sister." We'll see in this video that this too is a lie. Let's now launch into the meat of this video, which is discussing the events that lead up to Antiochus's second invasion of Egypt. A very nice description of this time period is found in Livy book 45, which reads, quote, "Antiochus was now master of the rest of Egypt, but after his check before Alexandria, he retired from its walls. The elder Ptolemy VI, whose restoration to his throne Antiochus pretended was his sole object in invading Egypt, was left at Memphis, and Antiochus withdrew his army in Syria, prepared to attack whichever brother should prove victorious." End quote. Before continuing, can I just quickly draw your attention to the phrase Antiochus pretended his sole object was the restoration of Ptolemy VI to the throne? This makes perfect sense of the phrase in verse 27 that they exchanged lies. So yet again, Daniel 11 hitting the nail on the head. Okay, let's continue to read Livy. Quote, "Ptolemy was quite aware of Antiochus's intention and hoped that by playing upon his brother's fears and holding out the prospect of a siege, he might possibly, with the active assistance of his sister and the acquiescence of his brother's friends, be admitted into Alexandria." What made Ptolemy VI suspicious of Antiochus was after handing over the rest of Egypt, he had left a strong garrison in Pelusium. It was obvious that Antiochus was holding the key of Egypt in order to make a fresh invasion whenever he chose, and for Ptolemy to engage in the intestine strife with his brother would prove to be to his ruin, since even if victorious, he would be no match for Antiochus after an exhausting war. End quote. So here we almost have the internal dialogue of Ptolemy VI. He realizes that Antiochus is up to no good. Even though he retreated back to Syria, he left troops in Pelusium, which means he's coming back to finish the job. Ptolemy also realizes that him fighting with his brother and sister will be to no avail, because even if he wins, he then has to fight Antiochus, and he knows that he's absolutely no match for Antiochus. So what is he going to do? Well, he realizes he needs to win back the trust of his brother and sister and be readmitted back into the co-kingship and be allowed to return to Alexandria. So Ptolemy begins sending messages to his sister asking to be reinstated as king and asking her to convince their brother to let him back into Alexandria. So we can imagine these letters saying something like, "I don't trust Antiochus. Please convince our brother to let me be king again and return to Alexandria." Livy writes concerning this, quote, "He, Ptolemy VI, began a correspondence with his sister Cleopatra and his brother's friends and continued to write to them until he had come to terms with them." So Ptolemy is sending all these letters to his sister, and in return, Cleopatra begins to urge their brother to let Ptolemy VI back into the group. So let's imagine Cleopatra saying this to Ptolemy VIII. "We should reinstate our brother as king and let him into Alexandria." Livy continues to write. Are you enjoying this video so far? Do you want to watch the rest of it? Well, the only way for you to do that is to become a patron. The full video is only available to patrons. So click the link in the description below and become a patron today.